everyone. Welcome to Skype a Scientist Live. We're so glad that you're here with us today. Today, we're going to be talking to Dr. Griffith all about neuroscience. We hope you all have all of your questions ready to go. So just so you're aware, today we're doing 3 live streams on neuroscience. We've got one right now, one at 1 p.m. Eastern, one at 2 p.m. Eastern, mostly for different age groups, but you're welcome to attend all of them if that's something that you're interested in. So yeah, that's really all the housekeeping we have today. We're all part of, this is all part of Black in Neuroscience Week, which is a super cool collection of material and events that are happening all week to highlight Black neuroscientists. It's been super awesome to follow. So if you go on social media, you can check out all the stuff they've had going on this week. It's been a super inspiring and wonderful week. And we're super jazzed to be a part of it. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Griffith to introduce herself, what she does, why she likes it, and give us a little bit of background on our brain and peripheral nervous system.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited to be here and so excited to tell you more about the brain and beyond. So briefly, I'll just introduce myself again. My name is Dr. Theanne Griffith and I am a neuroscientist. I currently work at Rutgers University in New Jersey, but soon I'm going to be opening up my own lab at the University of California, Davis. And in addition to neuroscience, I'm also a children's book author. And at the very end of our talk, I'll briefly tell you a little bit about my books. If you're really interested in science and reading, they might be a good buy for you. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen so we can get started. Okay, so if you guys want to use the Q&A button to enter in any answers, I'm going to ask a quick question and see if we have any people that want to guess. What might be some of the things that your brain does? Again, you can enter any answers into the Q&A. Any thoughts?
Don't be shy.
Don't be shy, it's okay.
Only non-judgmental bunch around here.
Yes, this is not a test. Allows you to think, process information, very good. Tells your body how to function, excellent. Remember, so memory, definitely very important for memory. Any other guesses out there before we move on? Helps us move and think, definitely. Emotions, oh, that's a very good one. Brain is definitely important for emotions. Okay, all right. So your brain does all of those things. Those were excellent, all excellent answers. In addition to those things, your brain also is important for telling you that certain bodily sensations are occurring. So have you ever stubbed your toe and that really hurts, right? That's pain. And your brain helps you know that that pain is occurring. And that's important because we don't want to hurt ourselves. So we need our brain to tell us that. Touch. Our brain also tells us that we're touching something or that someone is touching us. If we hold a cell phone, for example, we can tell that it's smooth and that it has round edges. Or if we were rubbing our hand on sandpaper, our brain would help us figure out that that was kind of rough. Ever gotten bitten by a mosquito? That itches, right? That itchy sensation of a mosquito bite or poison ivy or any kind of rash, chicken pox, all of that stuff, all of that itch your brain is telling you is occurring. And then also temperature, right? We go outside and we know it's cold, or we go outside and we know it's hot. Your brain is processing all of that information. And your brain is part of something called our central nervous system. So that consists of your brain and your spinal cord. But in order for your brain to process all of these bodily sensations like pain, temperature, touch, and itch, you need another nervous system. And that is called your peripheral nervous system. So as you can see here, your peripheral nervous system covers basically your entire body. So your skin is full of little neuronal antennas. everywhere that are picking up all of these bodily sensations. And not just your skin, but also your internal organs have little neuronal antennas that are reaching out to things like your stomach. So when you eat a huge slice of pizza and you get really full, full from that pizza, that is your peripheral nervous system detecting how big your stomach has grown and then sending that signal back up to your brain. If you ever drink a lot of water or a lot of milk or juice and all of a sudden really need to go to the bathroom, that's your bladder getting bigger and bigger. And you have peripheral neurons from your peripheral nervous system that are sending these antenna-like projections to your bladder and being able to feel that it's getting full and that it's time to hit the potty. So your peripheral nervous system is really, really important for communicating all of these external signals to your brain. And so what is a peripheral sensory neuron? So this is a picture of one. It's called a dorsal root ganglion neuron. So it's kind of a fancy name. We can just call them DRGs, okay? I know it kind of looks like an alien, but I promise you it's not. So these DRGs, or peripheral sensory neurons, have a cell body, so that round thing in the middle. And then remember I was talking about them sending out those antenna-like projections all over your body? Those guys are called axons. So a DRG has two. One that goes out to different organs, like your skin, or even sometimes your heart or stomach. And then another one that then sends all of that information that it's picking up from your skin or other organs to the central nervous system. And that's how things like cold information or touch, when we feel a bug bite and it itches, when we stub our toe, even down all the way in the tippy point of your toe, you have one of these kind of antenna-like neuronal, well, many antenna-like neuronal projections that are down there ready to pick up all of those signals and then shoot them back up through your spinal cord and to the brain. And so these cells aren't really just kind of hanging out anywhere or everywhere. They're actually held, these dorsal root ganglion cells, in little clusters that line your spinal cord. So if you reach to your back, right, you can feel your spinal cord down the middle, kind of bony-like structure. Well, on either side of that spinal cord, you have what are called ganglia. And that's, again, a fancy name. You can think of them as like little balls or little clusters. And they're right here in this image, you can see those little round clusters. And they're like a bead that goes down your spinal cord. And inside of those clusters are the individual dorsal root ganglion neurons, or those individual sensory neurons that I just showed you on the slide before. And so as you can see here, if we look through the middle of one of those clusters, you can see all of these cell bodies. You see over here, this one, there's probably about 50 in this picture. And all of those cell bodies have axons that are coming out of them and either going to your skin or other organs or to your central nervous system, typically your spinal cord. And so this is what they look like. And I actually took this picture. That's a really fun part about being a neuroscientist, is that you get to take really cool pictures of neurons. And I will say that even though this picture has all of these colors, this blues, greens, and reds, those aren't real. So our neurons aren't actually blue or green or red. That's something that as scientists do, it's called staining neurons, and that allows us to be able to see them and tell which kinds of neurons are which. But it makes for really pretty pictures anyway. So that's a little brief introduction to our peripheral nervous system and what it does and why it's so important, right? Because it's really important that we can feel things like pain. If we didn't feel things like pain, we might not know that we were hurting ourselves. And as uncomfortable as pain is, it's important for us to learn things that we can do that aren't dangerous and things that we can't do that are dangerous. And similarly, it's really important for us to be able to tell if it's too cold outside or too hot outside. Imagine if you went out in the middle of winter and you live in, let's say, Chicago without a jacket. that'd be really bad and dangerous. You'd be very cold, and you could get something called hypothermia, where your body just gets too cold and kind of shuts down. So it's really important that our peripheral nervous system is healthy and working well and sending all of these bodily sensations, all of that information to our central nervous system so that our brain can process it and understand it. So with that, I just want to quickly show you the books that I write, because if you want to learn more fun, cool science facts like these, you can definitely check them out. They're a chapter book series, so they're great for kids who are age 7 to 10. And the title of the series is called The Magnificent Makers. And it follows best friends Pablo and Violet on these out-of-this-world science adventures in this magical laboratory called the Maker Maze. And in the Maker Maze, they go on this science challenge, and Maker Maze has all kinds of cool stuff, including watches that shoot lasers and holograms and robots. So it's a really, really fun and exciting series. And you get to learn about different science topics. So book 1 is all about friendship, but also about ecosystems and food chains. Book 2 is all about the brain, which is the perfect theme for this week. So you get to learn about the different parts of the brain and what they do. And also it highlights the importance of working as a team, which is also really critical for science. And then finally, the third book in the series, which comes out this September, is called Riding Sound Waves. And that one is all about your senses. So a lot about what I talked about here today, you'll learn also in book number 3, Riding Sound Waves. So with that, I will just say you can stay in touch with me. I can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Theanne Griffith. This is also my website where you can find links to buy my books. They're sold on Amazon, Target, all that stuff. And then I'm really excited to take any questions that you have and talk more about our brain and our peripheral nervous system. Okay. Oop, you're muted.
I know. There we go. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. That was super, super cool. So our first question here is, like, how did you first get interested in the brain? Like, when you were younger, what made you decide to become a neuroscientist?
Yeah, so when I was really young, like when I was in elementary school, I knew that I loved science. I was really curious about the world around me and how it worked, but I was more focused on maybe like becoming a doctor. But then when I was in high school, I took a class, an advanced biology class, and that's where I was first introduced to neuroscience. And I learned in that class that neurons talk to each other using electricity. So basically in your brain and even in your peripheral nervous system, those neurons are kind of like shooting lightning bolts, if you can imagine, just all over the place. And that's how information is sent. And I thought that that was just so cool that I wanted to learn more. And so from that point on, from my since I was a junior in high school, I've decided I wanted to become a neuroscientist, and I studied neuroscience in college, and then I got my PhD in neuroscience, and here I am today.
Awesome. Our first question's from Kelly. Why are mosquito bites itchy?
I actually don't know the exact answer to that question, but I believe that it's something in their saliva, in the mosquito bite spit, that activates something in those itch neurons in your skin that then sends the itch signal to our central nervous system. I don't know exactly what it is in their saliva, but it is some chemical in mosquito spit, basically, that makes us itch. It almost like causes a little allergic reaction, if you will.
I am so reactive to mosquito bites. I'm always the one at the party
so
the most. Oh man, mosquitoes are the bane of my existence. All right.
This is not fun.
Cool. Sasha wants to know, what school did you go to?
Like college or all the schools? Well, okay, I'm originally from Alexandria, Virginia. I was actually born in a small town in central Pennsylvania, but I did most of my growing up in Alexandria, Virginia. And there I went to West Potomac High School. And then once I graduated from West Potomac High School, I went on to Smith College, which is a women's college in Western Massachusetts. Yay, Smith. And then I went to do my PhD in neuroscience at Northwestern University in Chicago, which is why I reference Chicago in my talk, because I know just how cold it gets there. And yeah, so those are the places where I went to school.
Awesome. One of my lab mates from grad school went to Smith and talked about how wonderful it is, Allison Kerwin.
It's an amazing college for all you budding women, young women scientists on here.
Jay wants to know, I broke my leg. How did my brain know that?
So your brain knew that from a lot of things. One, your brain doesn't necessarily know that you broke your leg. What your brain knows is that you have an injury, right? Because what your brain is then receiving are pain signals. So those dorsal root ganglion neurons, as I said, they're everywhere. If you would look at your skin, like let's say that we could make our skin clear and we could make neurons green. We would basically look green because there are so many neurons all through our skin. Those little antennae are just everywhere. And so if you have something like a break, you also have neurons that go to your bones. And those pain neurons are going to sense that something bad happened. And I'm imagining also that the break could cause damage to cells around it. And those cells can also release chemical signals that can then activate pain neurons and say, hey, something is really not going okay with your leg.
Do you believe that meditation could help kids or other people?
I definitely do. I cannot speak to hardcore scientific data that shows that. But one thing that we do know as neuroscientists is that stress is bad for your brain. Stress is overall bad for your body. It takes away from our ability to focus, and therefore it takes away from our ability to learn and remember things. And it just has overall bad consequences on our health, right? It can raise our blood pressure, all types of bad things. And so what meditation does is it kind of brings that stress level all the way down. It kind of quiets your brain down a little bit, right? And reduces some of all of that kind of hyperactivity. And again, I can't speak to exactly the scientific basis of that, but overall, I think that meditation reduces stress, and anything for you that reduces stress is good. It's going to help you focus and learn better, hands down.
I think we could all use a little meditation.
Definitely.
We're all just doing our best over here. All right, Olivia, age 8, wants to know, what if one of the bones in your spinal cord breaks? Is that different from a leg bone?
It's different from a leg bone in that it's actually worse, because the bones so they're not technically in your spinal cord. Your spinal cord is actually a bunch of neurons. And the bones that surround your spinal cord are called vertebrae. So if one of those breaks, your spinal cord is very important. It's very important. It's really how your peripheral, it's the main source of the connection between your peripheral nervous system and your central nervous system. And it allows us to feel things, it allows us to move, and at certain levels, like very up high in your neck, it allows us to breathe. It allows our heart to beat. And so it's a very special organ, and it needs to be protected, which is why you have those big bones like that. So the pain associated with breaking your spinal cord, breaking the vertebrae that cover your spinal cord, or breaking your leg, are going to be very similar. It's going to hurt. Those same neurons are going to be sending those same pain signals. But breaking your leg, there isn't a major organ. Like, no one wants to break their leg. It's still not good. But it's not going to interfere with your heart beating or your ability to feel things in the same way that breaking that bone around your spinal cord will. So it's definitely much worse to break your spinal cord bones than it is your leg bone.
For sure. Age 8 kiddo and mom would like to know, why do I sometimes not know when I'm thirsty?
Usually that's an attention thing. So in order to be able to know, to feel certain bodily sensations, right, your brain is involved, and your brain is constantly bombarded with information all the time. You know, there's light over here, there's a sound over here, there's a smell over here, I felt something sharp, ouch. all the time you're being bombarded with information. And so what your brain has to do is filter out that information and say, no, I don't care that it smells like hot dogs over there. I don't care that that light is really bright. I'm not going to pay attention to that today. And sometimes, like, let's say you're doing something really fun, like playing outside with your friends, and there's all of this fun emotion going on. Your brain's not listening to those thirst signals that your body is telling it. So that's why it's always important, to kind of slow down. This is almost where meditation can come in too, right? Slow down, take a moment, allow your brain to then be able to receive the important information that it needs.
That's solid advice. Check in with yourself every once in a while.
Speaking of which, I'm thirsty and I'm going to take a quick sip of water. Thank you for reminding me.
I'm thirsty just thinking about it.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. The next question is, what's your favorite area of brain science, from MJ, age 7?
I mean, my favorite area of brain science, I'm gonna change that question and answer it in 2 parts. So my favorite area of neuroscience, which is going to include our brain, our spinal cord, and our peripheral nervous system, is definitely sensory neuroscience. My research is really interested in understanding just how all of those electrical signals I was telling you about travel from our skin to our central nervous system. Basically, neurons use electricity to send signals, and they do it in using things called action potentials. And just think of it like Morse code, like all of those little beeps are kind of like neuron words. And what I'm trying to understand is how those beeps are made and exactly what they mean. I'm trying to figure out the code that our peripheral nervous system is using to talk to our central nervous system. Now, if we think about the brain, so I started studying the peripheral nervous system more recently, but when I was a graduate student and I was getting my PhD, I was more focused on the brain. And my favorite brain region is the cerebellum. And I talk a lot about the cerebellum in book 2 of the Magnificent Maker series, because it is one of my favorite regions. And the cerebellum is really important for movement and coordinated movement. So if you guys are sitting at home now, I want you to kind of put your arms out to the side and hold them there. And then you can bring them to your nose and touch it. Pretty easy, right? That is your cerebellum at work. If you had a problem with your cerebellum or something wasn't so right back there, it might look a little bit like this. Oh. That kind of motor coordination is really, your cerebellum is really important for that. And also motor learning. So if you're learning how to shoot a basketball, or learning even how to play a piano and coordinate your fingers perfectly to the keys, that's your cerebellum at work. And also another reason that I like it is it's beautiful. If you look at the neurons in the cerebellum, there's this one kind of neuron called the Purkinje neuron. It looks like this massive tree. It's a spectacular cell. It's one of my favorites.
That's awesome. I don't know if you ever watched the Powerpuff Girls as a kid, but they had a character called Cerebellum, and that's how I always remember what that is.
I watched it a little bit, but not so much. I don't remember Cerebellum.
All right, so the next question is from Harlan. Can blue light permanently alter your nervous system and brain?
I don't think it can permanently alter your nervous system and brain. I'm not 100% sure which, are you talking about the blue wavelength of light, or, because also scientists use something really cool called optogenetics. And so optogenetics basically is where neuroscientists can use light to activate neurons and study what happens when you activate very specific neurons in the brain or even in the peripheral nervous system. But even those changes aren't permanent. They're just when the scientists shine light on the neuron, then it activates them. But the minute they take that light away, then the neuron stops sending out its signals. So I'm not, if that's what you're asking, then not permanently, but scientists definitely use light, and not just blue light, they can use other kinds of light to activate or even make neurons quiet and say, what happens if this neuron is normally talking and we silence it? What does that do? And that helps us understand what that neuron's role is in the brain.
Awesome. The next question is, how does ADHD work?
That's an excellent question. And unfortunately, the short answer is we don't know. But that is a very an active area of research and something that scientists are really eager to figure out. But it's not really clear if it's too much activity of certain cells or not enough activity of another cell, or if the cells kind of talk to each other in weird ways. It's not really clear. And what's also not clear is why some people develop it and other people don't. Even like, let's say siblings, you could have two kids that are from the same parents, but one kid develops ADHD and the other kid doesn't. You know, they have the similar genetic background, similar environment, but still something happened in one brain that didn't happen in another. So those are questions that people are actively trying to figure out, but unfortunately at this point we don't have a very solid answer.
Sounds good. Yeah, these questions are sometimes they seem simple, but they're so complex.
But they're such important questions, and they're such good questions. And these are questions that scientists literally right now are trying to figure out. So you guys are on the right track. You're asking all of the right stuff.
For sure. Awesome. Ty, age 8, wants to know, what exactly is your brain made of?
Oh, your brain is made of so much stuff. So one of the most commonly heard of cell types in your brain is the neuron, right? So that's kind of, these aren't brain neurons, but those are the neurons that are talking to each other, that are sending electrical signals to each other, and they get kind of the most attention in neuroscience. But there's another kind of cell that actually is much more abundant in your brain. There are many more of these cells than other cells, and they're called glia cells. And for a long time, scientists thought that these cells were kind of like supporting cells, right? The neurons are doing a lot of stuff. They're sending all of this electrical information. Like I said, it's like a lightning storm in your brain every day. That requires a lot of energy and a lot of support. And so it was thought for a long time that the glial cells were there to kind of help the neurons out. But now what scientists are actively figuring out is that those glial cells can actually help you send the information in much more of an active way. So they can kind of they can kind of alter how the information is sent between neurons. And a fun fact is, when everyone's probably heard of Albert Einstein, right? Very, very smart man from about 100 years ago. So what they found when they looked at his brain after he passed away was that the number of neurons he had in his brain was very similar to the number of neurons that other people have in their brain. But what was different is that he had 3 times the number of glial cells than the average human brain does. And so that also kind of suggests, okay, so maybe these glial cells are really important for learning and memory and cognition and thinking.
Right. So was his brain just like ultra dense?
Yeah, there's a lot of white matter. A lot of white matter. So that's a fancy name for when people talk about. So those are the 2 main types. There's also some immune cells. So you know how we have an immune system in our body when we get sick? We have these immune cells that go and they hunt down bacteria or viruses and they eat them up and get them out of our body. We also have immune cells in our brain, and those are called microglia. And so again, we're still trying to fully understand their role in brain function, but basically sometimes we have neurons that maybe die off, or they get injured, or we have, a disease that gets into our brain. Those microglia are going around and kind of cleaning up our brain. You can kind of think of them as like little street sweepers, going around and just cleaning up everything and making sure that our brain is nice and healthy.
Awesome. Here's a tough question. What's the purpose of chronic pain?
So chronic pain actually doesn't have a purpose. That is an excellent question. Chronic pain is your peripheral nervous system gone wacko. So instead of just telling you, okay, you have pain, you have an injury, you need to deal with this, pay attention to your leg or pay attention to your back. Chronic pain is when those pain signals don't shut off. Even though there's no longer an injury, or even though you fix the injury, those neurons are still saying that you have pain, and that information is wrong. And so that's why it's really important to understand how our peripheral nervous system is sending information to our central nervous system, because sometimes it sends that information inappropriately, or it's wrong information. And so we need to figure out, okay, how can we turn off that information or block that information or alter that? So chronic pain isn't normal. It's not, and it's not a good thing. And it's something that is a very significant health crisis that we have here in the United States that, again, scientists are actively trying to figure out how to deal with.
Yeah. Thanks for answering that. Sally wants to know, how fast can neurons pass signals to each other? And is there anything that can slow them down or make them faster?
These are excellent questions. So I'm going to answer that question in the context of the peripheral nervous system, because it's visually, you can kind of think about it in a really cool way. So as I mentioned, you have these dorsal root ganglion neurons that they're up by your spinal cord, but they're sending these axons, or these little neurona antennas, all over your body. And some, they go all the way down to your feet. So you can imagine someone like me, I'm almost 5'10". That is a really long axon. And I still need to be able to know quickly, if I stub my toe or if I stepped on something hot, I need to know pretty fast that happened. And so the signals are sent pretty fast. And it kind of depends on the neuron. Some neurons are faster than others. So our sensation for touch, so the neurons that send touch, they send information at about 10 meters per second. So it would take less than a second, maybe about a tenth of a second, for that information to get from my toe all the way up to my spinal cord and brain and stuff. But the neurons that send pain, they do it more slowly. So they're closer to about a meter per second. That's why, I don't know if you've ever maybe touched like a hot oven or something, there's a little bit of a delay between when you touch your finger and you're like, oh, that's hot, and then you bring it back. That's because our pain sensing neurons send information more slowly. And the reason that they send information more slowly is that they're actually missing a part of them, kind of. It's not that they're missing it, it was never there. But pain neurons, so most neurons, in addition to having those axons, they have glial cells that I was talking about earlier that wrap around them. And they kind of work like they help send messages more quickly. And so our neurons that encode touch have a lot of these glial cells wrapped around them. But our neurons that encode pain don't. And so that message takes longer to transmit. And that's normal. That's not an abnormal situation. That's just how our bodies developed over time. But that's a good example of how information can be sent more quickly or not.
Awesome. That's very cool. How do nerves connect?
Excellent question. So most nerves connect via something called a synapse. And so a synapse is literally two neurons coming almost together. But believe it or not, neurons in your brain, and as they talk to each other, they're not actually touching. There's a tiny little space in between the two of them. They are connected. There are some proteins on one side of the neuron that connect to proteins on the other. But the actual cell, the actual nerve terminals, as they're called, or the endings of the nerves, aren't touching. So what happens in one neuron is you have a signal that travels down the axon, and that electrical signal is then converted into a chemical signal. So the end of this neuron has a lot of chemicals, and those chemical messages are then released. And then they bind to little proteins on this other side of the neuron and pass that information along, and it gets turned back into an electrical signal. So neurons use a combination of electricity and chemicals to talk to one another.
That's super cool. When I was first deciding what kind of scientist to be, I was torn between neuroscience and immunology of squid, because it's both like cell communication, basically.
Yep.
So cool.
Very cool stuff.
Yeah. Here's a fun question. Why do people sometimes call your brain your noodle?
actually not sure. I can't say I've heard that before, but maybe because it's kind of squishy and mushy like a noodle, like kind of, believe it or not, if you took your brain, like your brain is in your skull and that's kind of holding it together, but actually it's a little bit kind of like Jello, maybe a little bit more firm than Jello, but it's pretty wobbly, you know? So that might be why they call it your noodle, but I'm not 100% sure.
Great question. I don't know either. Let's see. How does your brain heal from injury?
It's actually really hard for your brain to heal from injury. And it gets even harder the older that you get. So when you're born, I think you're born with about 60%. So you're born with the majority of the neurons that are going to form your adult brain. And I think all of the neurons that are going to form your adult brain are pretty much there by the time you're around 12. I think that's correct. I could be a little off, but it's more or less something like that. You're not born with quite all of your neurons, but you're born with most of them. And then by the time you get, around 10 to 12, they're all there. And the unfortunate thing about neurons is, for the most part, there are some, but for the most part, once a neuron dies, it's not reborn. Again, there are some exceptions to that, but if you think about the overall percentage of neurons, the vast majority of them, once they're there forever. So the neurons I have in my head right now are the same neurons that I had when I was 10 years old. That is not the same for my skin. My skin cells are changing over all the time, but my brain cells are not. And so when you have an injury and you lose neurons, they're gone. They're not coming back. And that's why it is so important to take care of your brain, to wear a helmet, to, if you're in a car, wear your seatbelt. So if you get into an accident, you're less likely to have any kind of injury to your head. Remember when we talked about earlier how, breaking your leg versus breaking your spinal cord? The same thing goes for your brain. Those neurons are so precious and so important. And once you lose them, there are things that can be done for sure. You can go through rehab to kind of retrain your brain, because while the number of neurons might not change if you lose some, how they talk to each other, your brain is very adaptable. So it can learn to function in a new way, but it's not going to be quite the same. So it's so important to take care of your brain and protect your head.
Sounds good. So we are running a little low on time. So we'll do one more question. And then we'll do our final questions that we ask everybody. Let's see. So, okay. So here's a kind of tough question. We'll see how you respond to this one. My mom had me and she was tired all the time. But she told herself to not be tired and she wasn't as tired anymore. How does your brain listen to what you say and make that work?
That's an excellent question. And again, one that we don't fully understand, but there is we call it in neuroscience kind of top-down regulation. And so all that kind of means is like mind over matter. And it's not that your mind can if you lose a toe, your mind can't say, I want a toe back, and it grows. It doesn't quite work like that. But your brain, again, pays attention to certain signals and ignores others. And so if you're kind of feeling tired up to a certain point, you can kind of ignore those tired signals if you want to and focus on the other signals. Now, you can't do that forever. Eventually, those tired signals are going to overwhelm your brain with say hey, pay attention to me. You need to go to bed. But you can ignore them for a bit, for sure. And your brain can kind of selectively pay attention to the things that it wants to and ignore the things that it doesn't, up to a certain point.
Right. Sounds good. Okay, so we like to ask everyone the same couple questions at the end. First of all, is there anything that you wish that we'd asked you today that we didn't and you'd like to share?
Oh, goodness. Let me think. I'm not sure. I feel like you got such awesome questions. This was amazing. I can't think of anything off of the top of my head. But if I come up with something before we wrap up, I'll be sure to ask you. But we got such great questions. You guys covered everything.
That's awesome. All right, the next question, it's a two-parter. So so let's say you have the attention of everybody in the world. What is something that you wish everybody in the world knew about your area of expertise? And then what's another thing you wish everybody in the world knew about literally anything? It can be as silly and insignificant or like big picture important as you'd like.
I think what I wish everyone knew about the brain is kind of what we were just talking about the brain and about your nervous system in general, and just about how precious and important it is and how much we should take care of it, right? So it's not just your brain that can't regenerate. The same thing happens for your peripheral nervous system. So if you damage, even if you sometimes damage your skin too much by a burn, you know how it gets a little bit numb? That's because those peripheral neurons have been too damaged, and they also can't really regenerate. So I would just reinforce the concept that you really have to take care of your brain, your spinal cord, and just your body in general. You know, treat yourself well, because those things, once you lose it, they're gone. So wear your helmet, wear your seatbelt, stay away from the stove, all of that good stuff. And then remind me of the second question again.
Oh, if you could tell everyone in the world one thing, just like silly, insignificant, big picture, anything about anything, what do you wish like everybody knew?
Oh gosh, I'm so bad at this, thinking on my feet. Let me think for a second. What did I wish everybody knew? Okay, I think a lot of people know this, but not everyone knows this. So my dad's originally from Barbados, and I personally think it's the most awesome island in the world. And so I wish everyone got to go to Barbados and see how amazingly beautiful and wonderful it is.
Solid answer. Okay, sounds good. That's now added to my post-pandemic.
Exactly. Once we're all back and healthy, go to Barbados, enjoy the beach.
That's excellent. They have squid there, so I'll.
They do, and turtles and everything.
I'll go swim, say hi to my little squid friends. That sounds great. All right. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. This was amazing.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been awesome.
This is super fun. So remind us, where can we find you on social media?
So you can find me on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at DocTheaGriff, DocTheaGriff. Also, my website, TheanneGriffith.com. That's where you can find all the information about my books and also order links in case you're interested in purchasing any of them.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again for joining us. And thank you, Erin, for signing. This was wonderful. Thank you all for joining us today. So we will be back here in about 18 minutes for our next session, which is going to be neuroscience again, but for the middle school crew. And if you want to just come back, It's not exclusive to other ages. So come on back. We'll be hearing from another neuroscientist, and we'll see you then. So yeah, thank you again.
All right. Thank you guys. Have a great one. Bye.
Bye.